Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan, and the podcast, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. That includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops, and also brought to you by Master Packager, an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. So, we got relatively lucky last month with Windows updates, but this month seems to be a different story. Microsoft has confirmed an issue on Windows 10 and Windows 11 caused by this month's Windows updates, which sees the ability to reset or recover a device possibly failing. PCWorld.com reports the issue affects Windows 10 22H2, Windows 11 22H2, and Windows 11 23H2. So essentially, any version of Windows 11 earlier than 24H2. So if you are on 24H2, you are not affected by this. But if you are currently affected by this, there is some positive news. Computing.co.uk has reported that Microsoft has rushed out an emergency patch to resolve this bug. So the good news is, if you have been affected by this, it seems there's a patch already out there to fix this. Another concerning issue is that the August updates are also reportedly corrupting PC SSDs when writing large files. This issue is impacting Windows 11 version 24H2 and specifically relates to Windows Update KB 5063878. TechScene.eu reports that users suggest their SSDs sometimes appear as raw or are simply no longer recognized by the operating system. Reportedly, the risk of encountering issues increases when an SSD is already mostly full, making the error more visible. Various symptoms have been reported, including Explorer freezing, unreadable smart values, and error messages during input-output operations. Microsoft has confirmed that this is actively being worked on with hardware partners to find a solution. There's also another issue being reported related to the recent Windows updates, and this one is specifically around AutoCAD on Windows 11 and Windows 10. And that's AutoCAD products AutoCAD, Verticals, and LT versions 2022 through 2026. And the issue appears to users that they're being requested admin credentials and the application will not open on launch. So essentially, it's that MSI dialog, and it's like a prompt for UAC prompting users for credentials. At this moment in time, Autodesk says the only real solution is to uninstall the latest Windows security update. So that's not ideal, and hopefully there's a more permanent resolution on the horizon. Cloud Software Group is aware of reports describing the MadeYouReset HTTP 2 vulnerability. If you're not familiar with this vulnerability, it's listed as CVE-2025-8671, and it's a distributed denial of service attack that exploits a logical flaw in the HTTP 2 protocol implementations. The vulnerability leverages malformed HTTP2 control frames to bypass the maximum concurrent stream limits, leading to resource exhaustion and denial of service. Security researcher Gal Bar-Nahum reported that the vulnerability could impact multiple implementations of the protocol. While the protocol considers resetting HTTP streams as closing them, in practice, these requests continue to be processed by the server. This discrepancy creates a gap between the requests the protocol deems inactive and those that are genuinely active, allowing for the exploitation of server resources. Cloud Software Group says that customers using their managed cloud services do not need to take any action. I guess that's one benefit of SaaS is, hey, yeah, this is an issue, but we're taking care of it. And for the on-premises customers, they have shared an advisory CTX 695088 with steps that you can take to protect your organization. And it seems the main features or products in the stack that are impacted are Citrix Session Remote Start, Citrix Storefront, and Citrix Secure Private Access, which is not all that surprising. because those would be primary users of that protocol. It has been a pretty crazy week or so for Intel, which saw its shares jump upwards off the back of Softbank buying a $2 billion stake in the company. Then subsequently, it was announced that the US government would also be buying about 9.9% of a stake in Intel for $9 billion. It looks like the stock initially declined on that news, but it did gain again, up 3.7% at the time of scripting this episode. This is a really interesting story to me because I worked with banks around 2008 when they received a bailout. This strikes me as a bailout in all but name. The Irish government, in fact, only sold the last of its stakes in some of Ireland's biggest banks this summer. So, 2008 to 2025 for essentially what amounts to at least partial nationalization of private banks. And the way I interpret this story is there's at least partial nationalization of Intel, a tech company, which seems a bit crazy. Now, I must say, I have not seen this investment being framed as a bailout, but if you listen to this podcast regularly, you will be aware that Intel has been struggling for several years now. They lost Apple as Apple launched their own chips for some of their products. The start of ARM has been eating into their market share, and the growth of alternatives like AMD and obviously outside of the actual CPUs. The GPU market has certainly skewed in the way of NVIDIA primarily, but also AMD as well. Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities did not cause this, obviously, but it also seems like nothing but bad news has happened for Intel since those vulnerabilities. As someone who also worked and lived in the United States for many years, I also find this quite interesting that the US is bailing out tech companies like this as a supposed beacon for free markets. Like, you can kind of understand why they would have to do it for something like a bank, where a lot of people's pensions or uh, savings are tied up. But for a tech company, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, the good news is that hopefully it will save some jobs from Intel, although at this point, Intel has unfortunately laid off thousands upon thousands of employees already. And when they get money, it does not necessarily mean they're going to keep employees on. Investors come in and typically they shave off more employees. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what this means for the long term future of Intel. Personally, I think it's a bad investment given uh, the layout and where things are going with the market. But hey, let's not count them out too soon. Over the last week or so, I saw multiple stories about Windows 10 end of support, which of course comes this October, which at this point it's August going into September, so it's only a few weeks away. One of the stories I saw was from PC World, which stated many have yet to receive the dialogue required to register for extended security updates, which is concerning as, like I said, we are now just weeks away. People have reported seeing other dialogues like reminders about end of support, but not for getting those extended security updates, though it does seem some people have received the dialogue, just not everyone yet. I saw another outlet was recommending alternatives like using Zero Patch, which I'm not sure about that. It seems kind of risky to lean on a third party alternative for the security of the operating system that they don't own. But, you know, I guess if you're in dire straits, it might make sense. Why not? I've certainly seen Zero Patch being recommended for patching certain security holes in the operating system by the likes of bleepycomputer.com in the past. So it seems like it's got some fans out there. I just would not rely on it for the general security of a legacy operating system myself. Hey, but to each their own. In a follow up to a previous story in this podcast, OpenAI has now announced GPT Go, which is their new cheap tiered subscription. This tier is limited to India for now and costs just $4 a month. Bleepycomputer.com reports GPT Go includes pricing in euros, US dollars, and British pounds. So in euros, it would be €4. In the US, it would be $4. and in the UK, it would be £3.50, which suggests that this will become available in other regions too, but at the time of this recording, it's only available in India. OpenAI says that the $4 Go plan gives you access to some features which are not available in the free plan. So you're getting access to GPT-5, expanded messaging and uploads, expanded and faster image creation, longer memory and context, limited deep research, projects, tasks, custom GPTs, and then they also say, oh, you can get these other benefits if you upgrade to the $20 subscription tier, but I won't cover that because that's already been readily available for some time. OpenAI added that ChatGPT Go includes higher usage limits also compared to the free plan for core chat and tools. However, limits may vary based on system conditions. So, being lower tier, you're going to be lower priority, I guess, when there's constraints on the system. It's interesting that they're rolling it out in India first. I'm assuming that's out of like necessity or need. Maybe they're seeing a lower pickup in the paid subscription tiers in India and they're trying to at least get something out of them. So, whether it works or not remains to be seen because, as I've covered on many episodes of the podcast, OpenAI is a company that continues to hemorrhage money. xAI has reportedly filed an antitrust suit against Apple and OpenAI on a few grounds. One, Apple integrating ChatGPT, and two, claims that essentially there's collusion between OpenAI and Apple to keep OpenAI's ChatGPT application prominently ranked within the Apple charts for the App Store. So on the first point, I could kind of agree, right? Because if you're using Siri on your Apple devices now, it will ask you if you'd like to use ChatGPT if it can't find something itself. But honestly, it's spurious and it's a terrible feature too. It just doesn't work very well. But then on the other part, which a lot of the griping seems to be about, with like ChatGPT basically being so popular within the App Store, I don't think they have a leg to stand on that because DeepSeek's application, as I covered on previous episodes of the podcast, was number one in the app chart for a few weeks. Obviously, there's other generative AI applications that do feature in the charts. I believe Perplexity's app was number one in India for some time. Now, in the statements by xAI, they've been full of bluster, so it also makes me kind of think that they're taking this suit possibly with no intention of actually bringing it to trial, and they're using it as a promotional tool because they basically word things suggesting that Grok is superior to ChatGPT, and that's, if you've used them, you know that's not true. Grok is pretty terrible, in my opinion. I know the latest models are much improved compared to the previous models, but for me, I think I've shared in this podcast before, it's stubborn, which is probably not a bad thing when you compare it to like ChatGPT, which will fold to your will and just validate your opinion no matter how stupid it is. But Grok does not even bend an inch, and it's wrong quite often. So yes, ChatGPT is a confident liar, but it's willing to learn and change its responses based on the context and based on you pointing out with evidence that it is wrong. Whereas Grok won't budge regardless of if you point out with evidence that it is wrong. So personally, I would put absolutely no trust in Grok at all. And for other language models, I would place pretty much no trust, but I'd at least go and verify sources. I wouldn't even waste my time with that with Grok. Again, to each their own. You know, if you like Grok, more power to you. With all of these Gen AI solutions, though, humans need to be in the mix because they are confident liars. Gartner recently updated the Magic Quadrant for Desktop as a Service, which to no surprise sees Microsoft maintaining its place as the designated leader. Gartner also reported that they rarely encounter organizations rolling out a new on-prem VDI solution in their accompanying report with the Magic Quadrant, which also suggested that by 2027, 20% of workers will use a hosted machine as their main workspace, up from 10% in 2019. The Square of Sorcery also predicts that by 2027, virtual desktops will be cost effective for 95% of workers, up from 40% in 2019. All of that also remains to be seen. I won't fully dump on Gartner. They have access to resources that I doubt very many do. So they're probably in the best position to forecast and do these types of reports. But they've also been wrong in the past. So I would not put all that much stock in this, but it is interesting. And, 10% in terms of number of workers or percentage of workers using a hosted machine as their main workspace is not huge. I'd be a little more skeptical on the cost effectiveness by 2027, though. DigitalJournal.com had an interesting article this week which put the spotlight on a French Senate hearing from back in June where they questioned a representative of Microsoft. Now, this was not necessarily a direct employee. It looks like they're suggesting that this is like legal representation for Microsoft. But this person, when asked, could not guarantee that data from French citizens cannot be transmitted to the United States authorities without the explicit authorization of French authorities. Now, this should likely not come as a huge surprise. I recall covering a story about U.S. authorities demanding access to the contents of someone's email that was being stored in Ireland at the time. Microsoft at the time fought tooth and nail against the request for years, but the U.S. subsequently passed the Cloud Act that essentially requires U.S.-based providers to hand over whatever is requested, regardless of where it is stored. And given the current geopolitical situation, this is likely a huge reason why certain countries, particularly in Europe, remain to be cloud averse and why it's unlikely that that's going to change anytime soon. I think it's pretty much on a industry to industry and company to company basis whether or not they're more willing to trust the cloud. And there certainly seems to be more acceptance for certain use cases, but that does not include necessarily where sensitive data is involved. Now, luckily, a lot of these SaaS providers are giving enough flexibility that data can be stored locally in for some workflows, whereas like the management pane can be hosted in the cloud, so you get the benefit of some of the services and the publishing features from the cloud. So you get that scale, you get that ability to publish from any location without having the customer data going up into the cloud. So there's been this little dance going on, right? Vendors have been changing their approach to the cloud to make it more appealing to those who do not want to lose their data sovereignty. And cloud providers have been moving more of their resources into these sovereign clouds. However, the law does suggest that if the provider is based in the US, regardless of where the data is, they could be required to provide it. So you got to be careful out there. A former employee of Eaton Corporation was sentenced Thursday to 4 years in federal prison for sabotaging the company's computer systems after he was effectively demoted in 2019. Reports suggest he planted malicious code that triggered system crashes and blocked employees from logging in, and it was estimated to have cost the company thousands of dollars. Davis Liu, who's 55 and a Chinese national, also faces potential deportation as a result of his conviction. He was found guilty in March of one count of causing intentional damage to protected computers, following a 6-day trial before the U.S. District Court. Just another example of some rogue tech worker with a grudge going crazy and messing up their lives. So do not do this. Just find another job, people. I know several outlets recently started sharing what mostly reads like opinion pieces on AI as a bubble, and more worryingly as a bubble that will burst soon, comparing it with the dot-com bubble burst of the early 2000s. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, warned that some company valuations were insane. A senior analyst at the currency trading firm Swissquote said, quote, "The Altman comments may have been a wake-up call for investors, sparking a sharp pullback in high-flying names," end quote. Now, I'm not sure why these investors or financial institutes would need someone like Sam Altman to say that these valuations are insane to realize that they are, but okay. It kind of seems like that's a speculative asset, which I thought cryptocurrency as a speculative asset was a bad thing, but I digress. At the beginning of the week, the share price of the data mining and spyware firm Palantir, which has billions of dollars worth of US government contracts, plunged almost 10%. The AI chipmaker, NVIDIA, fell more than 3%, while other AI linked stocks are affiliated stocks, kind of loosely affiliated in some cases, such as ARM, Oracle, and AMD, also lost ground. CNN had an article around tech stocks struggling, suggesting that SaaS platform vendors, such as those from Salesforce and others, may be feeling the impact of the promises of agentic AI coming. So, someone maybe using Salesforce may be thinking, maybe our money spent on this would be better spent on agentic AI. Maybe this platform offers us a way of doing things that's a bit more manual. Maybe in the future, with agentic AI, we can get some more benefits at a lower price and also probably more automated. So it seems in general, there's a bit of a feeling that maybe the AI bubble is bursting, that generative AI is jumping the shark. I think there's still massive benefits. And you heard me earlier. I'm definitely skeptical of a lot of the Gen AI promises. They are confident liars, like I said earlier, but there's still huge upside to it. And it definitely is a revolutionary technology, in my opinion. But yes, the valuations still continue to be crazy. And also the shifts by companies based on where the technology currently is at seems crazy to me. But again, as I've said in the past as well, I'm not some tech Nostradamus. I'm not this incredible big picture thinking guy. Terrible wording, but you know what I mean. Don't take my word for it. I'm just some arsehole with a podcast. CNBC had an interesting article suggesting that wage growth data reports that currently across many sectors, including tech, employees who are staying at companies are the ones receiving wage increases, and those going to new jobs are no longer the ones predominantly being rewarded. So, in recent history, it seemed like you had to switch jobs to get a significant pay rise, whereas now data is suggesting that those remaining loyal are getting significant pay rises. CNBC suggests that a reversal like this rarely occurs outside of periods of weakness in the labor market. And if you look at the labor market today, I guess it's being inferred that this is a strong labor market. Unemployment is relatively low, not just in the US, but in countries like Ireland as well, where I live. But I would also suggest that the labor market is weak. I think people are staying in their jobs because there's very little faith in the labor market at the moment. There's a lot of flux within organizations, and there's just a trepidation, I would say, for people in general. There was hyperinflation. We kind of thought we were over it. And it just seems like with the way that things have gone economically and tariffs and all kinds of other craziness, that hyperinflation has returned and cost of living is crazy, which I think is part of the reason why those who are loyal to companies are getting pay increases because they simply need pay increases due to the cost of living increase. But in tech, specifically on the vendor side, it seems like jobs are still continuing to get cut quite drastically. So in our industry, it seems like there's not that much confidence in particular, but also outside of our industry, it seems like people are worried as well. But on that gloomy note, now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. I'll only have one this week because you know what? I'm on holiday. Usually I just make no difference or make no change when I'm on holiday. But I see that this episode currently without editing is over 30 minutes. I do have more scripts, tricks, and tips that I could cover, but I'll just go in order of what I've listed and just pick the top one. I saw ZDNet had an article where they shared 10 open source applications they recommend for every Windows user. Now, you'll probably disagree with the list. I certainly disagree with some of them, but I always find these lists kind of interesting and fun to read. I had this idea on my own blog site a few years ago to list like, oh, my favorite apps of the year, just as like an annual wrap up type thing. I lost the devotion to keeping that up, but it's kind of a fun thing to think up, and I always find it fun to read what other people's opinions are, and you might too. Hey, but that's it for this episode of the podcast. The audio might be a little bit different. I am in a hotel and I'm recording with my little travel microphone, but hopefully it is usable. Thanks so much, and I'll probably get an episode out again around the same time next week, I'm thinking, because next week I have to travel. But thanks all for listening.